Are any of the machines, I know it was on War Room the other day with Steve Bannon, have any of the machines been looked at? He had said that one was looked at in Georgia.
I'd have to check on that in terms of Georgia. I know during the audit they did check on those machines. They're really, if we can just go off the record for 1 sec here.
Yeah, of course. I don't want us to say it if it's not. That's why we're checking.
I think they have looked at the machines. When the Secretary of State did its audit, there was a fair bit of looking at the machines. The audit came in pretty darn close to what the machine count was with the receipts. So, I don't know the outcome of those, but our understanding, again, this is from the Secretary of State's office, was that there weren't any physical issues with machines on those inspections.
Again, that was on December 5th, 2020. Trump campaign officials saying there weren't any physical issues with Dominion voting machines.
That was some devastating new audio obtained by MSNBC that shows that Trump's own campaign knew there was nothing wrong with Dominion voting machines, but refused to admit it publicly because Trump was busy spreading the big lie that ultimately resulted in the January 6th insurrection. And it's pretty telling that the campaign official here is only willing to say the truth over the phone when he goes off the record. Why? Because they were lying to the public in order to try and steal the election. And remember, while Trump's own campaign was confirming off the record that Dominion voting machines were totally fine, Trump himself was demanding that the Georgia Secretary of State find 11,780 votes because he was falsely accusing election workers of illegally changing equipment on the Dominion machines.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state, and flipping the state is a great testament to our country, because there's just it's a testament that they can admit to a mistake, or whatever you want to call it. If it was a mistake, I don't know.
They're changing the equipment on the Dominion machines, and then that's not legal. And they supposedly shredded, I think they said 3,000 pounds of ballots.
And just to add one more layer of irony to all of this, the swing state counties that had Dominion voting machines mostly voted for Trump. Yes, really. The company that they were all accusing of some mass conspiracy that was supposedly switching thousands of Trump votes to Biden votes that one of his lawyers said was part of a secret scheme organized by the Venezuelan government. Those machines actually conducted elections that mostly went to Trump. Trump didn't have a problem with Dominion. He only had a problem with the Dominion machines that Biden voters used to cast their votes. There is no consistency to these conspiracies. It's just about whatever is expedient for them at a given moment. And sometimes they're even saying different things at the same moment. After the 2020 election, there were Trump supporters in different states across the country demanding that they stop the count and also count the votes, just depending on whether Trump was ahead in a given state or not.
Count the votes! Count the votes!
And that's what's so dangerous about this whole MAGA agenda. It's one thing to have wildly different views on any given topic. It's another thing when you're dealing with a cult leader who is completely untethered from reality and who will fundamentally change his views at a whim to gain power. And it's made that much worse by a network like Fox broadcasting to their millions of viewers these lies over and over again, even though their own hosts know that they are lying. When Fox called Arizona for Biden because, Biden got more votes from voters, this is what Tucker Carlson said in a group chat with Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity. We devote our lives to building an audience, and they let Chris Wallace and Leland fucking Vittert wreck it. For Tucker Carlson, it wasn't about the objective reality that Biden had won Arizona. It was about building an audience, regardless of facts or truth. It was about feeling entitled to fealty in repayment for having spent years on TV. As far as Tucker's concerned, you all owed him blind loyalty because he felt he deserved it. And remember, this is the same guy who admitted out loud that he is a liar.
I mean, I lie. If I'm really cornered or something, I lie. I really try not to. I try never to lie on TV. I just don't, I don't like lying. I certainly do it, out of weakness or whatever.
And we especially know that he's a liar because according to his own text messages, he secretly hates Trump. We are very, very close to being able to ignore Trump most nights. I truly can't wait. I hate him passionately. I blew up at Peter Navarro today in frustration. I actually like Peter, but I can't handle much more of this. Tucker even called Trump a demonic force, a destroyer, in another set of text messages. And thankfully, we know all of this because Dominion's lawsuit against Fox is moving forward, which is ongoing and only getting worse for them. But while Tucker and other Fox hosts were saying these things behind the scenes, this is the garbage they were spewing on air on their shows.
Not only did they use a Venezuelan company to count our ballots, which almost should be illegal per se. Number two, they didn't allow Republicans in key places to observe the mail vote. That makes the mail vote completely invalid. Now, they didn't do it everywhere. They did it in big cities where they have corrupt machines that will protect them, meaning in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh, in Detroit. They didn't have to do it in Chicago, in New York, or Boston. They could have. They have corrupt machines there. They did it absolutely in Phoenix, Arizona. They did it absolutely in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Republicans were shut out.
We've got evidence of corruption all across the country in countless districts. The machine ran an algorithm that shaved votes from Trump and awarded them to Biden. They used the machines to trash large batches of votes that should have been awarded to President Trump. And they used a machine to inject and add massive quantities of votes for Mr. Biden.
With this particular thing that's going on now, I've been all in trying to find the machine fraud, and we found it. We have all the evidence. So at all these outlets that have been calling me, from the Washington Post, New York Times, every outlet in the country, they go, Mike Lindell, there's no evidence, and he's making fraudulent statements. No, I have the evidence. I dare people to put it on. I dare Dominion to sue me, because then it would get out faster.
This is why Fox is in such devastating legal trouble. They can't claim they were just airing these lies because it was newsworthy when they were acknowledging behind the scenes that it was total bullshit. And that's why Dominion has already been granted partial summary judgment, which means the judge is likely going to instruct the jury that Fox is already liable, at least in part. At this point, it's likely that Fox is going to be begging Dominion to settle, which I certainly hope Dominion won't do. I certainly hope this is going to go to trial and that Fox's brand will end up even more tarnished than it already is. Does that mean that the MAGA crowd is suddenly going to have an epiphany and stop believing that network's propaganda? No. But it does mean that Rupert Murdoch could lose a lot of what he seems to love the most: money. Before you go, a quick announcement. I've started a Spanish YouTube channel. Democrats desperately need to be able to appeal to Spanish-speaking audiences, so this is me doing my part. To help that channel get going in the algorithm so that we can finally start spreading our progressive message and breaking the conservative stranglehold on Spanish-speaking media, please subscribe and watch a few videos. The link to that channel, called Brian Teller Cohen Espanol, is right here on this screen. And of course, to see more of my content in English, make sure to subscribe to this channel as well. The link is also right here on the screen. Thanks so much for watching. You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So Glenn, we've officially got a flipped witness against Donald Trump. Can you speak on the latest news in the federal classified documents case?
Yeah, it's kind of a big deal because Donald Trump's former director of IT at Mar-a-Lago, gentleman named Yuscil Taveras, has flipped, cutting right to the chase. Really interesting the way it came about. So Taveras was represented by a lawyer from Trump world, a guy named Stanley Woodward, a guy who pretty clearly seemed to have Donald Trump's best interests at heart.
I mean, he was literally getting paid by Donald Trump's PAC.
Yeah, and we've seen this movie before, right? Remember when somebody from Trump world was representing Cassidy Hutchinson, and then once she got a legitimate lawyer and made a break with Trump world, the truth started tumbling out to the extreme detriment of Trump, Mark Meadows, and others. Well, here we go again. Mr. Taveras was represented by a Trump world lawyer. He went into the grand jury, Jack Smith's grand jury in Washington, D.C., and he lied. He lied to protect Trump. He lied to protect Trump's co-defendants, Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira. And then Jack Smith said, you know what? We think this guy has got a conflicted lawyer. We think this lawyer is protecting Donald Trump, not zealously representing his own client. And they petitioned Chief Judge Boasberg to get a conflict-free attorney appointed to Taveras, somebody who would legitimately represent Taveras' interest. The judge did that, And as soon as Mr. Taveras got a legitimate lawyer who was looking out for his best interests, he flipped. He said, you know what? I want to retract the lies that I told the grand jury, and I want to tell the truth about the scheme of Trump and Nauta and De Oliveira to delete video surveillance footage that had been subpoenaed by the grand jury. Talk about incriminating evidence and talk about powerful evidence of a cover-up. This spells real trouble for Trump and his co-defendants.
So what's the difference here? Because in that indictment, and based on the grand jury testimony that he had first retracted and then given the truthful testimony for, what is the difference now? What is the news here in terms of an agreement that he's reached with Jack Smith that we haven't already seen based on what we read in the indictment, which is him basically just flipping on Trump then?
Yeah, well, in the indictment, I think Taveras said, he really didn't have any information about Trump and the other co-defendants trying to delete video surveillance footage concerning the classified documents. But now that he's gone into the grand jury and told the truth and basically given up Trump and the other co-defendants, he has saved himself. Why do I say that? When you go into a grand jury and you lie and you cover up the crimes of others, Taveras was facing a perjury charge for openers. He was facing an obstruction of justice charge because he's covering up the crimes of others and he's interfering with the grand jury investigation of those crimes. Let me tell you, Brian, perjury carries a 5-year hit, potentially. Obstruction of justice carries up to 20 years in prison. Taveras was potentially also looking at an accessory after the fact charge. What is that? Well, when you know that others have committed crimes and you lie to try to help them get out of those crimes, or your lies have the impact, the potential of helping them get away with those crimes, you could also be charged as an accessory after the fact. So Mr. Taveras, if he had stuck with his lies, he would have had a whole world of trouble coming to him. But you know what? He would have protected Trump and the other co-conspirators, co-defendants. So now Mr. Taveras is on the right side of the law. He's going to be on the right side of history. And it really does spell trouble for Trump and the other co-defendants.
Well, to that point, what impact will this testimony by Taveras have on Trump? Like, how much worse did Trump's chances in this trial just get as the result of this one witness's cooperation with the federal government?
Significantly worse, because not only does this provide more evidence of Donald Trump's crimes, his unlawful retention of classified information, his obstruction of justice, and his violation of our nation's espionage laws, but it also provides important evidence of consciousness of guilt. Because you know what? You don't need to delete security video footage of what was going on, in and around that storage room where those classified documents were being held, unless you know that you're guilty of some crime. You only cover something up if you know you could get in trouble. So, it's not only substantive evidence of criminal activity, it's powerful evidence of a guilty conscience, of criminal intent, of corrupt mens rea, state of mind. So it really is an incriminating twofer that the prosecutors are getting from the testimony of Mr. Taveras.
Well, Glenn, who among us hasn't deleted the security footage of an entire resort's worth of cameras?
It was just a full storage issue on the server. They wanted to, clear up some memory.
Yeah, that's all. Just making some room. Could Judge Cannon do anything to suppress this testimony by Taveras, or do anything to interfere in any way, given this new development?
Two different questions. I don't think the judge can do anything to suppress this testimony.
Okay.
I think she can interfere in the prosecution in Florida in lots of ways, large and small. I think primarily she can interfere on the scheduling front. She can keep pushing deadlines further and further down the road, which inevitably will have the effect of having to move the May trial date even further down the road. But here's the thing. Once Taveras got qualified, conflict-free counsel, once his Sixth Amendment right to counsel was honored, he began telling the truth. There is no legal basis to suppress any of that. Now, Mr. Tavares will be cross-examined mightily at trial, and Trump's lawyers will try to make it seem like he really told the truth the first time around when he said, I don't know nothing about nothing, when he was represented by a conflicted lawyer from Trump world. But let me tell you, Brian, that dog ain't going to hunt in front of the jurors.
Now, Tavares has further implicated Walt Nauta and De Oliveira. Those were the other co-defendants in the classified documents case. Does this testimony now by Tavares make the case stronger against all of them and increase the pressure on those people to start cooperating? And do you expect to see that?
Yeah, it really does, because each co-conspirator is criminally responsible for each crime committed by other co-conspirators, whether the first co-conspirator participated in the crime or not. So I actually should have said it's not just an incriminating twofer, it's kind of an incriminating trifecta, because the other thing that this will almost inevitably do is it will ratchet up the pressure on Nauta and De Oliveira, and one of those two may be the next to flip as a result of Tavares giving it up.
And what is the benefit of flipping early versus just holding on as long as you can, and when it just seems inevitable that this thing is going downhill and that there's no defense here, no hope to prevail here, then you ultimately flip? Why do it sooner rather than later?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I will tell you, different prosecutors have different schools of thought. Some people will approach these potential cooperators, right? People that we know did wrong. We know were part of a conspiracy, but it's early on in the investigation. We're just beginning to put witnesses in the grand jury. We might step to that kind of a person and say, look, the earlier you come on board, the earlier you cooperate, tell us about your own criminal conduct and tell us about the criminal conduct of others, the better deal you're going to get. Maybe you even get immunity. Maybe you get a sweetheart plea deal. Maybe you get a plea deal that carries only probation, no jail time. The earlier you come on board, the better. Why? Because it allows us to begin developing our investigation with information from an insider, from a member of the conspiracy. That is so important, particularly during the early stages of a grand jury investigation. So most prosecutors, and I think the prevailing wisdom is, the longer it takes for a potential cooperator to come on board, the less benefit he or she is going to get. Because now the prosecution is working, they're building the investigation with other evidence, and the evidence that the cooperator might have to offer becomes a little bit less valuable and a little bit less important over time. Some people will say, some prosecutors will say, you know what? Once I indict you, all cooperation is off the table, and then you're going to trial. I never took that view, Brian, because I never wanted to lose sight of the importance of getting the biggest criminal fish. So I always said, look, a good cooperation agreement that comes in at any stage, whether early, whether just before somebody's indicted, whether after somebody's indicted, and here's the real outlier, I will even take somebody to trial, get them convicted, assuming there are separate trials to come against others, get them convicted. I'll step back to them and I'll say, you know what? You are now convicted. You're now facing 25 years in prison. How about you come on board and cooperate now? And then when I go to your sentencing hearing as the prosecutor, maybe I ask for 5 years or 8 years instead of 12 years or 15 years or 20 years. So there's never a bad time to bring somebody on board as a cooperator, as long as that person can help me build a case to the biggest criminal fish.
Right, and in that case, it's Donald Trump here. Glenn, I do want to ask one last question, and that is on this issue of sentencing. You had mentioned before that the goal here was to convince the jury in the classified documents case. Even if the jury does return a guilty verdict against Donald Trump, will it ultimately be up to Judge Cannon to sentence him, and what could that look like if she is in the bag for him?
You know, the judge would have to be so deep in the bag for Donald Trump that if she were to sentence him to a wildly inappropriate sentence, let's say he's convicted on all counts, he will be facing in excess of 30, 40, 50 years in prison. If she does something like give him probation or give him maybe 6 months in prison, that would be such a radical departure from what the federal sentencing guidelines provide as the appropriate sentence. Now, let me add that the federal sentencing guidelines are discretionary. They're not mandatory. So she wouldn't be violating the law if she went wildly below what the guidelines say is an appropriate sentence for the crimes of conviction. But it would raise so many red flags. It could potentially be appealed by the prosecutors. And she would have to be so willing to put her whole career on the line in giving him an obscenely sweetheart sentence that I think it very unlikely. I have a feeling, Brian, if he is convicted by a jury, she will impose what we would call is a heartland guidelines sentence, something that's probably right in the middle of the guidelines, which will result in Donald Trump going to prison for multiple years.
Okay, well, obviously, we'll stay on top of this as soon as we have any updates in this federal classified documents case or any of the other cases that we're watching right now. So if you're watching and you want to stay on top of this stuff, make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown. You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, we've got some breaking news in Trump's criminal case down in Florida regarding his illegal retention of classified documents. One of his former employees, who's referred to in the indictment as Trump Employee 5, he is now speaking out and has broken from Trump's legal team. So, first off, what's the significance of this?
You know, it looks like this character, Brian Butler, who has been in Donald Trump's orbit for literally decades, 20 years now, and seems to be very closely associated with all three of the people who are indicted in the Florida case. That would be Donald Trump, Walt Nauta, and Carlos de Oliveira. In fact, he was best friends with Carlos de Oliveira, which I think will become important when and if Brian Butler is called as a witness at the Florida trial. But, you know, one of the things that we've learned from this brand new CNN reporting is Brian Butler has been cooperating with federal authorities for a very long time. There's reference to multiple interviews with the feds. I believe he testified before the grand jury, perhaps multiple times. And the reporting makes clear that Brian Butler is somebody who was never willing to take an attorney from Trump world to represent him. In other words, to hold him close the way Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira have been held close, right? So it looks like he has been providing information for a very long time that sounds really damning of Donald Trump and the other two co-conspirators. So some of the most, I think, interesting and potentially damaging information that we're learning is that I believe it was on June 2nd, 2020, at the same time, Donald Trump was flying to Washington, D.C., together with his lawyers to meet with federal prosecutors. Brian Butler has revealed that he was helping load box after box after box of what he now believes to be classified documents onto Trump's plane that could be taken to New Jersey, to his golf club in Bedminster. So, Brian, we've kind of known all along that there were potentially classified documents that were taken from Mar-a-Lago and transferred up to New Jersey, to Bedminster. But this sort of confirms that, and the timing couldn't be more nefarious, right? When Donald Trump and his lawyers are meeting with federal prosecutors, presumably trying to talk them out of indicting Donald Trump for the classified documents and obstruction of justice crimes, he's whisking away. I believe
he's literally obstructing justice.
Yeah, right. At the same time, he's multitasking is what he's doing. And the reporting, according to Brian Butler, is that there were some like 10 or 15 boxes, the white bankers boxes that we've heard so much about, where Donald Trump is ferreting them away to New Jersey. And here's the thing, Brian, remember, it was 3 months later, August of 2022, that the FBI got that search warrant and got buku boxes, lots and lots of boxes with classified documents that Donald Trump had refused to give over previously. So now I think we have a pretty concrete picture here. Donald Trump took 10, 15 boxes from Mar-a-Lago to New Jersey, to his golf club, long before the FBI got that warrant and collected up as much of the classified material Donald Trump still had down at Mar-a-Lago. So my question has always been, and this has been a curiosity to me, why in the world was there never a search warrant conducted at Bedminster in New Jersey for what we now know were additional classified documents that Donald Trump was playing hide and seek with?
Glenn, people are going to see this, and the first word that's going to come to mind here is a flip. Is it possible that we're seeing a flip here?
You know, I don't know that I would call this a flip. And here's why. Flip is kind of a term of art. What does it mean? It means that somebody who's got some criminal exposure, right? Maybe a co-conspirator who was in on Donald Trump's conspiracy to unlawfully retain these classified documents. Somebody with criminal exposure has decided to basically cut their losses. They've decided to take responsibility for their own crimes and flip against the others. Ordinarily, what happens is that person will plead guilty. That person will enter into a formal cooperation agreement that requires them to testify truthfully in the grand jury and at trial involving anybody else, you know, that they have information about, anybody else they know has committed crimes. That's what what a flip is. That's what, when somebody becomes a cooperating witness. This doesn't feel like that. The reason I say that is because Brian Butler made clear in this extensive interview he gave to CNN that he didn't know what was in the boxes in June of 2022 when he was asked to just help load them onto Trump's plane. He said now he knows, but most importantly, he said he's had his own counsel all along. He wouldn't get an attorney from Trump world, so presumably he's been getting good advice all along. And that's probably why he has been cooperating with the authorities all along. There's no indication in the reporting that he had criminal exposure and flipped. The indication in the reporting, though it's not completely spelled out, is that he's been cooperating from day one, presumably because in part he didn't have any criminal exposure. And it's interesting because Brian Butler now says, I wanted to come forward. I wanted to make my story public. He was referred to as Attorney 5 in the Trump indictment down in Florida, because people are saying this is a witch hunt, and it's not. And I wanted people to have accurate information about how the crimes that are charged against Donald Trump in that Florida federal indictment are based on evidence. And I know about some of that evidence because I lived it and I experienced it.
Okay, so I guess that raises the question, what kind of damage can he do to Trump?
Sounds like he can do a lot of damage to Trump and damage to the other co-defendants, De Oliveira and Nauta. So the article reports that he and De Oliveira were best friends, and it becomes clear as you're reading the reporting that Brian Butler knew and was communicating with De Oliveira about the fact that things weren't right. There were discussions about how they wanted to delete surveillance tapes, but at one point somebody tried to placate Brian Butler and said, but we'll keep recording somewhere else, but we're going to delete the recordings of this now. I mean, the sense that you get there is they're just trying to desperately cover their tracks, and there really is no sort of cohesive plan that they have. It's just that they're trying to do away with all of the evidence that they can before all of this comes home to roost, and it falls into the hands of the federal law enforcement agents. So it really feels like Brian Butler can do a whole bunch of damage, not only to Trump, but to De Oliveira and Walt Nauta. And those are the three co-defendants who are presently charged in the Florida case.
Glenn, what's the significance of the fact that Butler retained his own counsel and didn't kind of glom on to the existing Trump orbit legal team?
Yeah, we have seen this movie before, haven't we? When witnesses or, people who might even be complicit in the crimes of Donald Trump originally are represented by Trump world attorneys. And what do they do? Well, they lie, they cover up, they conceal, they, hold everything close. It's much like a mafia organization where you don't flip on the boss and we're going to get you a lawyer to make sure you remain loyal. The person that comes to mind when I first read this reporting is Cassidy Hutchinson. If you'll recall, and that was one of Mark Meadows' close assistants and aides, she at first was provided a Trump lawyer, and she started to lie. She kind of fell in line. She wasn't telling the January 6th House Select Committee the full truth as she knew it about Trump, Meadows, and others. She finally got an unconflicted lawyer, somebody who was looking out for her legal interests, not Trump's legal interests. And she began to tell the truth. She has become something of a hero now because she has laid bare some of what was going on in the White House, including Trump, Meadows, and others on and around January 6th. Here we have Brian Butler, who said, you know what? I don't want to be represented by a Trump world lawyer. I'm going to get my own independent conflict-free counsel. And that is probably why he's been cooperating with federal law enforcement authorities all along. You may remember there was also reporting about somebody else in Trump world, somebody else who worked at Mar-a-Lago, who originally went into the grand jury and lied to try to cover up some of Donald Trump's crimes. He had a Trump world lawyer at the time. And then there was a battle fought by Jack Smith trying to get that individual conflict-free counsel. The chief judge in D.C. ordered that he was entitled to conflict-free counsel. And once he got that conflict-free counsel, he said, I want to retract my false testimony that I gave before the grand jury, and I want to go in and testify truthfully about what I know, concerning Trump and company and their crimes. So listen, the Sixth Amendment right to counsel is so important, Brian, but it is a Sixth Amendment right to conflict-free counsel, somebody who has the client's interest at heart, not the mob boss's interest at heart.
Well, look, I know that Brian Butler is not an indicted co-conspirator in all of this, but he still was a witness to these crimes. So does the fact that he's coming forward and openly cooperating with prosecutors, does that make it more likely that we'll see other witnesses cooperate against Trump, whether indicted or not?
Usually there's strength in numbers. And when people, start to break from the criminal organization or the criminal conspiracy that is formally indicted, with Trump, Nauta, and De Oliveira being co-conspirators, it often emboldens more people to come forward with the truth. There's safety in numbers. One of the first things I thought of when I saw that Brian Butler decided to go public with evidence that would incriminate Trump and others is I hope he has a security plan in place, because we all know what we will likely see from Donald Trump and how, he will try to inspire his followers, his supporters, to perhaps get after his perceived enemies. We've seen that movie before as well. So, but yeah, to answer your question, often when one person comes forward and breaks from the pack and begins telling the truth about what was going on inside a criminal conspiracy, it does often embolden others to want to, do the same thing, to want to get out there, to want their story told, so they can be on the right side of history. And importantly, Brian Butler said, one of the reasons I came forward was to counter the nonsensical witch hunt claim that Donald Trump keeps spewing into the public square.
Glenn, zooming out a little bit here, what's the status of the Florida trial, and when will we actually know what the trial date might be?
Yeah, great question. There's still a bunch of litigation underway. The last time the case was up in court about a week ago, the parties proposed trial dates. Jack Smith said, how about July 8th? Donald Trump's lawyers, when push came to shove, said, how about August 12th? And for some reason, Judge Cannon at the time said, well, I don't know that these are realistic dates. I'm not sure why that is, particularly when the parties were so close in the proposed trial dates, just virtually a month apart. And what did Judge Cannon do? She set no trial date. So right now, we are all flying blind. We don't know when Judge Cannon will issue a trial date, set a trial date. We don't know when that trial date will be, before or after the November presidential election. We do know that Judge Cannon has been receiving amicus briefs. Troublingly, she's been receiving a number of amicus briefs from some sort of Trump allied forces who are providing briefs on, how it might be the right thing to do under existing law to just dismiss the indictment against Donald Trump entirely. I don't happen to agree with that proposition, but there have been some ominous signs. Now, listen, judges are allowed, they're entitled, they're authorized under the law to take these sort of helpful briefs from other parties Ordinarily, judges will try to be even-handed about it, maybe take one or two that are arguing in favor of dismissing a case and one or two in favor of no. There is no reason to dismiss the case, and here is why, based on the existing case law, the precedent. So there have been some ominous signs, but with Judge Cannon, I don't think we have ever been able to sit back comfortably and believe she was doing the right thing in the Trump case for the right reason.
And let's finish off with this. If we do get some type of decision, I know that the Trump team is kind of throwing all their spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks right now. And among that spaghetti is this desperate attempt to actually have this entire classified documents case thrown out, basically. If Judge Cannon were to take the extraordinary step of accepting that request by the Trump team, would Jack Smith then have grounds to like what would his recourse be so that this trial doesn't just fall by the wayside?
Yeah, Brian, I rarely do you hear me say, I hope a judge dismisses an indictment, dismisses a criminal case. That's sort of not in my DNA as a former career prosecutor. But I have to say, if Judge Cannon decided to dismiss this case outright, and I do not believe there would be a legal basis for it, that would give Jack Smith the perfect opportunity to do two things. First and foremost, appeal the dismissal up to the 11th Circuit. And I have a feeling, we would have to see why Judge Cannon decided to dismiss the case, but I can see no lawful basis to dismiss. So that would give the 11th Circuit the opportunity to reverse her, reinstate the case. And the other thing that would do is, I have to believe, that would push Special Counsel Jack Smith over the line to filing a motion to recuse, to have Judge Cannon removed from the case because her impartiality can reasonably be questioned. That's the language of the federal statute that requires a judge to remove himself or herself from a case if their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. So,
well, wouldn't it be moot by that point anyway, if she's already ruled on it, and then doesn't it just go into the appeals process, and then isn't the trial court finished with it at that point?
So if she grants a motion to dismiss the case outright, yeah, the case at that moment is over. But Jack Smith, I'm sure, would immediately appeal it. It would go up to the 11th Circuit. What I think Jack Smith would do is he would file an appeal of Judge Cannon's motion dismissing the case, and then he would say, and in the event the 11th Circuit agrees with the prosecution, rejects Judge Cannon's ruling dismissing the case, reinstates the case, we are also asking that you, 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, order her removed from the case because she has shown that she's just not impartial.
Okay, so it would go back to the trial court just under a different judge.
It would if the appellate court, one, reversed Judge Cannon, reinstated the case, and two, directed that it be remanded to the trial court for a trial and that a new judge replace Judge Cannon. All of this is within the realm of possibilities.
Okay, and as we've spoken about before, that new judge would just pick up exactly where Judge Cannon left off, so the whole process wouldn't start all over again. The judge would just be read in at the point where Judge Cannon was before she made that hypothetical, ridiculous decision, and it would just go from there. So, to your point, all definitely within the realm of possibility. We'll keep an eye on this case as it continues to progress and to any more developments that we hear on the Brian Butler front as well. So for those watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.